Hey Savvy people, it's Savvy Nick here, and it's another round of Linus Tech Tips coming to us with their second Linux challenge. Let's review things and check out what's being done this round. All right, starts out pretty... We're just going to skip over to today's challenge and start watching from here instead.
With our desktop environment set up, Luke and I have a deceptively short pre-flight checklist of tasks to complete to be streaming ready.
All right, so it sounds like they're gonna be streaming in today's video. Let's see how successful they'll be at setting things up.
We'll need comms to chat and collaborate with our fellow creators, and software that's capable of...
In the first video, we saw Linus uninstall the desktop environment, so I'm worried about him installing more packages here on Linux. I believe he's using Manjaro, and then Luke is using Linux Mint.
capturing our gameplay, audio, and face cams.
All of these are pretty easily done. Seems like it's going to be fairly straightforward to them, hopefully today. Looks like they just need OBS, honestly. Could do all of these things.
And obviously, we'll need the aforementioned audio interfaces and cameras both working.
We both use Elgato key lights, which we've always controlled using Windows software.
Yeah, this one's going to be fun. Only using Windows software.
So we'll both need to find a
That's going to heavily depend on whether or not they support Linux at all.
workaround for that.
And no points will be awarded for having an ugly or bad sounding stream. It's got to look every bit as legit from a viewer perspective as it did on Windows.
So for me, I've streamed on Linux quite a bit. No big deal there. Everything that they're saying is completely doable and straightforward. Again, just installing some streaming software and then streaming on whatever platform they're trying to use.
Immediately, I started overthinking things. Sometimes that's the problem.
Yeah, that was apparent in the last video too.
Knowing just enough to be dangerous. I tried to apt-get OBS.
Yikes. Well, I already know the problem here. First off, let's talk about apt-get. That's actually deprecated at this point, so don't be using that. Just use apt instead. And then as far as the install OBS, I assume they're going to finish this out with Studio. I stopped it a little bit too early. They are trying to install a package, well, Linus is, with apt, which is for Debian-based distributions, and what they actually want is Pacman, since I believe he's running Manjaro, which is an Arch Linux-based distribution, so let me X that out. This is for Arch Linux-based distros, which he is using. So I bet this one went well. Let's hear about it.
The industry standard for desktop capture and streaming in the terminal, only to discover that Manjaro, the Linux distribution that I'm using, doesn't...
You know, I am super glad that they're using OBS because that's probably the easiest thing they could possibly do to get streaming going.
come with apt because apt is for managing packages on Debian and related OSs. Oops. Making life more difficult, the message that comes up when you try to...
I mean, honestly, Linus had a good idea trying to install and save some time using a package manager. That was a great idea, at least in my opinion, but clearly Linus has only been exposed to apt on Debian-based systems, so I'm sure that gave him a bunch of trouble here. We'll skip forward a little bit because you pretty much know what happens. But at this point, he does find the proper command to install it on Manjaro. It is unofficial, but I know I've specifically used OBS Studio, and I've installed it this way exactly on Arch Linux-based systems, specifically on Arch Linux. I can't remember if Manjaro has some sort of a store, but they probably have that available through the store, and that would be much easier. He keeps going back into the terminal, which is kind of surprising. Luke's done a better job of sticking to the stores that are offered by the operating system.
At a panic moment when I checked OBS compatibility and found out that it is actually unsupported in Arch, by the way, and its derivatives. But the good news is that upon launch, I was immediately relieved to find that it works exactly as expected.
Looks like he pretty much has 3 of his 4 check marks right off the bat. He's capturing the screen. Looks like he has his camera linked. And the only thing I'm seeing that's missing here is some sort of audio, but it looks like it's taking in the default audio as OBS does.
With some exceptions. For example, the NVENC new encoder doesn't show up as an option.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thought mine had it in there, but I could be wrong.
Which appears to be down to Nvidia's poop-tastic drivers on Linux. Side note here, I always kind of assumed that the Linux community was grousing about Nvidia primarily for their locked-down proprietary approach to things, and that it had less to do with the actual quality of the product. Now, I properly understand that it is definitely both.
It'd be nice if we could get some open source drivers instead of having to use the proprietary ones, but it is what it is. I know that there's going to be some gripe about how the settings look. So let's see here. Right. So he says the interface is kind of confusing, and I have to completely agree with him on this one. But honestly, that's the case on both Windows as well as Linux. Sure, he makes the point that it doesn't look as modern here on the Linux side of things. In my personal opinion, it's just as good. But one thing that's a little annoying is all the information that's thrown at you and all the jargon that's used in here is really hard for a beginner to kind of figure out, especially if you're being thrown into a new operating system and you have to adjust these graphic settings. The Nvidia settings utility, at least here on Linux, isn't completely intuitive. But again, let me just launch one here on this Windows computer. And you can see side by side, I mean, yeah, they look different, but honestly, the one on the left to me looks more modern than the one on the right, but that's just my opinion. Anyways, the settings, again, are kind of cryptic unless you know what things are being referenced or where you need to go, or if you've looked up how to fix something online. Overall, it's fair, and I see where he's coming from, but I think it should be more focused to the fact that Nvidia just needs to give us better control over things in general. And that's really it, so I'm going to move on to Luke's section where he tries OBS.
Once installed, though,
So look at this, a perfect way Luke's going right into the store on Linux Mint.
we noticed something. Window capture on Linux can be a little problematic. We couldn't seem to get it working at all at the start. I had an option for it, but it didn't work.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie, I've had plenty of issues with window capturing on Linux. I think it's just the way OBS is designed. It really picks up better on Windows, more than it does on Linux type Windows. So they're hard to actually capture because they don't show up automatically in the Windows section. There is ways of getting around that, but it's honestly no fault of theirs.
And Linus didn't even have that. But a few days later, I tried it again for a different project, and it worked just fine. I checked in with Linus, and his did too. Neither of us know what might have fixed it, but that's cool, I guess.
Yeah, the window recognition part of OBS is a pain, and I tend to avoid it altogether. I'm glad they got things working there, although it looks like it took some hocus pocus to get it working.
The bigger issue for me ended up being the software that just doesn't exist. There are third-party tools, for example, that allow key remapping. Keyboarding Master is evidently a popular one. But if your peripherals have a manufacturer-provided tool that is used to reconfigure RGB lighting, or the lift-off distance of your mouse, or the sensitivity steps of your DPI button, then get ready to install Windows in a virtual machine, pass those devices.
All right, this is getting too far into the weeds for me. It looks like he's trying to install or set up closed source software that's not supported on Linux. This is usually a big no-no. I guess he made it work somehow as a pass-through through a virtual machine, but that's kind of to be expected here with using Linux, and I think Linus is smart enough to know that. So we'll move a little bit forward.
But wait, there's a solution.
Because here's where he attempts to install open source software that's supposed to work with whatever closed source hardware he's trying to get working.
All I have to do is follow these simple instructions.
Now, you can't blame anyone besides the author of this open source project for not giving good installation documentation, because I know where he's about to go with this one.
A random script off GitHub and run it with no indication given whatsoever for how exactly to run a script.
Yeah, again, we just have to blame the author on this one. I'm sure they made an amazing contribution, but they probably couldn't get around to the installation documentation, to be honest. And this is a big no-no to anybody who's brand new to Linux. You don't want to be going searching through the web and finding open source software that you think may or may not work on your computer for hardware. It's just a pain in the butt.
Even the process of downloading it was unintuitive. And I know GitHub is for developers and not for end users, but
So this is kind of,
it's
let me see here.
to hide behind that shield when it took me less than 2 days to run into a situation where I had to use it.
I mean, this is sort of Linus's fault. In my opinion, I understand that he wanted to use a piece of hardware that doesn't seem to be supported by Linux. But at the same point, just looking for open source software and claiming that it's available and then trying to install it and probably fail at installing it doesn't mean that there wasn't another option perhaps, or even that it was the correct way of going about things. Probably should have just said, hey, look, I can't use this piece of hardware. It is what it is. Go back to Windows if I have to, you know. But that's not the point of this challenge. So let's see.
I mean, at that point, if GitHub is only for developers, then desktop Linux is only for developers.
Well, you can't compare the two because you can use Linux with an operating system and run basic functionalities, games, and what have you. But GitHub is really for developers. I mean, that's where developers host their code. So I don't know how you make a comparison of using that as a store to get down software. That's not what it's intended to do. It's just a repository to keep track of software and edits to that software's source code. So those two things aren't really a good comparison.
Expect it to, and launch in some kind of script running application doesn't seem that unreasonable. Newsflash, random contributor, you can also change a file extension in Windows.
Oh my. So clearly Linus had trouble running the install.sh script. So this is a shell script that he could have ran. I think this is being made way too convoluted. I'm just going to skip over a little bit over this. All they really needed to do is know how to use a repository, and they needed to clone down the source code. Perhaps, probably not, but maybe change permissions so they can run the script and then finally just run the script instead of what I believe he's about to do. Let's see here.
System. It's actually a lot more convenient than digging into the properties of the file to find out what it does. Anyway, pompous tone aside, that contributor did help me figure out my GitHub download. So turns out that right-click, save target as.
Oh my. That contributor didn't really help him much. Again, clone it down. There's even an option up at the top right. You can even get a zip file straight from the project and then unzip the install with the rest of the other contents of the project. This is just a roundabout way of not making anything work. So either way, that's fine. Hopefully they got things working with this one. We'll skip ahead a little bit.
Expected, most of the buttons don't work, but all the inputs and outputs that I had already configured in Windows did show up.
All right, congratulations there, Linus, getting the open source software actually working on your computer. That's actually a miracle with the rundown he was given of how to install it. All right.
My button.
All right.
My Go XLR loses power for any reason, at which point I will have to pass it through to Windows,
Yikes.
configure it in Windows, and then pass it back over to...
Okay, well, there's clearly some wonky stuff still going on there, but that's all right. Let's see here. Luke's audio issues.
And it sounded like my mic input had been duplicated.
My voice just feels deeper.
You know what? This is funny.
What?
And
Yeah.
chat was pretty convinced that I had set something up incorrectly.
Yeah, I'm pretty convinced you did too.
If I was a viewer of my stream, I probably would have said the same thing. But I've been using OBS for like 6 or 7 years now.
Good.
So I had my doubts.
Sure, but I think this is actually a settings misconfiguration because I ran into a very similar deal myself when I first started using OBS on Linux, and it was because of incorrect settings. What I did is I ran through the wizard as fast as possible that you get when you first initially start up OBS, and that caused a whole bunch of sound issues, and I actually had to reset things to the default without the wizard running. For things to get working properly. So hopefully Luke figured that one out.
OBS settings panel to prove it, but eventually, feeling out of options, I just restarted OBS, and yeah, that solved pretty much everything.
By restarting OBS, I don't know if he meant reinstalling or perhaps resetting to default, because just restarting it just seems crazy that it would fix that. But hey, maybe it did.
Which was kind of frustrating because
Yeah, that would be frustrating.
again, that you don't have to turn things off and on again to get them working in Linux, but hey, maybe that...
Yeah, I don't know how much that applies to proprietary software or just applications in general that you run as a GUI. You still might have to turn them on and off. I think that's a little confusion there. That's more of a services background. In Linux, you can pretty much restart any service or server or anything in the background without actually having to reboot the computer, which is a fantastic thing for system administrators because, you know, there's environments out there that have been running for a decade and have rarely gotten restarted. But either way, we'll keep going here.
That's just because I'm not really great at Linux yet. Maybe there's something else I can do.
Nah, don't beat yourself up about that one. Everyone's starting somewhere, and honestly, they're doing a great job so far. Sure, there's a little bit of complaints here and there, all expected ones, at least in my opinion. But honestly, I don't think they've hit any roadblocks.
Side of things, though, my mixer has worked flawlessly from the start. Though it is pretty simple as far as mixers go. I didn't have to change any settings, I didn't have to install anything for it, I just set it as my default input device and was good to go.
Awesome.
Once I got PAMAC figured out,
That's awesome.
It was surprisingly simple. PAMAC is a
Luke's statements were really awesome. That just shows you the power of Linux Mint, especially for beginners, because that's actually where a lot of people run into issues is audio, trying to get it working. So I'm glad that went off without a hitch.
program with a graphical user interface that functions similarly to the Pacman package manager that you operate in the terminal.
All right, so finally ditched the terminal and he's trying to go with a GUI package manager that uses Pacman. That might give him a little bit more luck.
At least it does once you find the hidden button in PAMAC to search Snap.
I gotcha.
Arch user repository engine.
That's because we don't want to be bloat, by the way, but I understand the frustrations. You don't want to enable extra repos, but that's purposely done.
It's basically like the Pop Shop from Pop OS, except it didn't try to brick my system the first time.
And a lot more powerful.
The only really was choosing the right package to install for Discord. There's regular Discord, and then there's Canary Discord. Whatever that is.
Well, that's a little goofy because I think if you would have taken the time and kind of looked down here, I know it's very grainy here, can't see much. It tells you exactly what this application is about. So both of them would have had specific information about the packages below in the description. That's kind of where you have to look to make sure you know what you're getting, because the other package was probably a user-based package. Perhaps if Linus enabled the Arch user repository, he would have seen that, but I understand why he wouldn't have caught that one.
The most official looking package, and I was up and running almost immediately once I found the super convenient
Awesome.
application volume mixer in the bottom right corner. The interface is kind of kludgy. Scrolling with your mouse wheel scrolls through both the devices and the levels of the individual devices.
It's probably just Manjaro in whatever desktop environment they're using.
Call to Luke went completely without a hitch. Or it would have if I'd known that it was starting. Unfortunately, I actually still have not figured out how to get desktop notifications working. I found a guide.
I'm gonna go a little further here.
That being said, there was certain missing features. Screen sharing across Slack, Teams, and Discord are kind of sketchy at best. They feel less stable, or they're even missing some features here and there. Outside of that, there's even really simple stuff missing every now and then. Like if I download a file in Slack and I click the Open Containing Folder button, just nothing happens. And speaking of missing features, I use the phone app for the Elgato.
I'm gonna scoot past this because Luke doesn't seem to be having too much trouble.
I do have an AVIO 4K capture card, which does work on Linux, but I don't have the micro HDMI cable that it would need to connect to my camera. I could pick one up, but just for this.
I think this is fine. I'm not sure why he needs an extra cable, but I've used capture cards or devices on Linux, no problem, through the video capture setup inside of OBS. No need to install drivers or anything, maybe just missing the cable here.
I decided to go with my old Logitech C920.
We're gonna go further.
Overall, the easiest part for me was getting my Camlink 4K up and running.
Yep.
It was garbled when I selected one of the duplicate sources in OBS, but immediately after trying the second one,
Look at that.
cleared up and has been picture perfect.
Awesome.
In the end, it worked. If you connected to the stream after we were done about 15 minutes of troubleshooting while we were just in the thick of trying not to starve, I'm sure any random viewer wouldn't have been able to tell a difference between one of my old Windows streams and this one.
That's great to hear, and I would have completely thought the same. I don't see why you couldn't. I've streamed almost probably close to 80 videos through Linux, and it's all been great, in my opinion. Easy to set up. Yeah, they had issues here and there, but I think it's more of them just not being familiar enough with Linux to get things going. I'm glad Luke got things going. And honestly, I think they need to do a different challenge. Instead of gaming on Linux, why not use Linux, and maybe they will in the future, but use Linux to revamp some old computer, maybe a laptop, Pentium processor with only a couple gigs of memory, something really old, let's say 10 years old, and watch that thing fly. And that's where Linux really shines. I think that helped the Linux community a lot because it's just going to get it out there to their huge viewership of people who don't know how powerful Linux can be, especially at reviving those old devices and computers. Now that would be something I would love to see.
Audio was good, capture was good. That's where the good ends, however. Literally everything I used past this point was a lesser experience compared to its Windows counterpart.
Yeah, I believe that.
Almost everything was missing at least one feature, and some, I'd say most notably OBS and Teams, were just...
I mean, you can't really dock Linux for that one. I mean, because these two softwares specifically were designed around Windows first and foremost. So they're always going to be ahead on that side of things. But I don't think he was actually missing any features that he wanted to use. At least I didn't see anything like that. Let's listen to Linus here.
Get out of it. If you're daily driving Linux for game streaming out of a genuine passion for learning more about it, then have at it. Have fun. But just know what you're getting into. PC gaming already requires a certain amount of tinkering. I mean, there's
You know what?
a reason that more people game on consoles. You know, whether it's trying to track down save files in some Vista era folder or forcing an aspect ratio in an INI file.
I think Linus is going down a path of good advice here.
But a Linux gaming PC, it requires all of that crap and then another mountain of crap on top of it.
I mean, it's true. I think he's being fair there. In general, I'd say it's good advice from Linus here. I wouldn't suggest streaming on a Linux PC unless you really want to learn about the inner workings and you're just passionate about using a Linux PC to stream. You're not going to have access to the same games. You're going to have a little bit more trouble setting things up like they did, especially if you're new to Linux. Again, what might be a better comparison is installing, let's say, Windows 10 or 11 on an old PC and then installing Linux and watching the two and seeing how those two compare. Bringing life to old hardware. You probably couldn't even install Windows 11 or 10 on old hardware. I mean, I know they specifically say which types of processors they can be installed on and which ones have been deprecated and all that fun stuff. So again, overall, this Linux challenge has good heart. It's getting great publicity here for Linux, and I'm going to love to see the next video, part 3, and what they do with that. I'm pretty sure they're going to be running more games and trying to get use out of Linux. I think right towards the end here, they tell us that they're going to try getting as many of the top PC game titles running on Linux as they possibly can in the next Linux challenge, which is going to be interesting. Overall, nice to see this video coming from the Linus Tech Tips group. And if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please make sure to post them in the comment section below. Also, make sure to subscribe below and hit that notification bell for more Linux and programming videos. Catch me in a great community on Discord, and I'll catch you in another video. Thanks for watching.